Supply chain disruption is expensive, and the higher the stakes, the more important resilience becomes. But building stable networks is more than just a numbers game. It needs real people, real insights, and a strategy built for real conditions, not just models. One man with plenty of experience of global supply chains and a strong awareness of what's needed to turn them into a competitive advantage is Knut Alicke, Senior Advisor to McKinsey & Company. His keynote at Brief Engage took an honest look about what supply chain leaders are getting wrong and right on the topic of resilience. Hi Knut, thanks for taking the time. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast here. I'm still a bit prompted by your keynote today about hidden supplier risks, about risk management general and supply chain risk and resilience management. And you kicked it off with the notion of these animals, the almost infamous risk animals, the black swan, the gray rhino, and what other animals are around there, the whole zoo. Why do you think is this an important concept, or why did you decide to start your presentation with those concepts?
Yeah. So first of all, thanks a lot, Marco, for having me. It's a pleasure not only to present, but also to discuss with you. So thanks a lot for that. I think talking about risk and resilience, we always need to understand why do we do that, and we do that because there's disruptions in the world, and it looks like disruptions are still around. So it's not that we can wait for a couple of years and then there is no disruptions. And then it's clearly very important to understand which type of disruptions are we talking about. Is it like the small hiccup, which we can cover with inventory? Or is it, and this is kind of to the animals, is it this black swan? And the black swan is just a very big disruption that has a very, very small probability. And that is why it's so hard to understand for people. And then there is these other disruptions, which is also a very big impact, but is kind of foreseen, and that's what is called a gray rhino, right? And everything that is currently discussed or implemented in terms of tariffs, for example, is an example for the gray rhino, whereas the Ever Given that got stuck in the Suez Canal is something that is clearly a black swan.
There's a lot to unpack already in your first mentions here. Many people looking into the concept of black swans or calling events a black swan, even if it was in reality more like a gray rhino where it was foreseeable. It still had maybe a low probability of materializing. That's sure. But it is also usually very uncomfortable for companies to tackle those things because they are quite structural. Based on your years of experience in this field, is this still something you see as well or feel as well, or do you think we are tackling, and that's maybe the point of my question, are we tackling the looming risks, the emerging risks, the ones we maybe see coming but don't want to see coming? Are we tackling them properly? And if not, why not?
So we are not tackling them properly. Very, very clear. And there's many reasons for that. So if you think about like the last 5 years, full of disruptions, companies like 5 years ago when the first lockdown started, they were caught hard and were not prepared. Then it felt like they were starting to prepare, and then they kind of I would say lost memory of disruptions.
I always call this the goldfish memory. It's like
exactly.
a very short time span where the crisis is remembered. Yeah,
exactly. It feels like every day is a new day, and we start again from scratch, right? So that's right. So agree on your question. So is it that we have these gray rhinos, that we kind of think of these gray rhinos as a black swan, and this is just for us a model to explain that we were not prepared. I would fully agree, but both have in common that we need to make sure that we have the right levers in place, right? So it's not that even if we would be able to know that, hey, here something is going on, we need to be prepared, and we need to be prepared for the short term, for the midterm, and for the long term, and then we need to pull that. Right, so that is super important.
Actually, I even spent at a few years ago a week with Nassim Taleb, who coined the black swan phenomenon in his book. And he also said it's the most used excuse for people closing their eyes in front of reality. But there's a saying which still sticks with me. I'm not sure if he said it or someone else, but you can close the eyes in regards to reality, but you cannot close the eyes of the implications of reality. So at a certain point, they catch up. We briefly discussed in one of the breaks today the importance of communication, and I think these risk concepts are a very close or a related issue there is that it's hard for us to communicate risks properly. You touched on it. It's like when we talk about a very low probability event with potentially huge impact, it's very, very hard to get funding for that or money allocation, budget allocation in any sense. And my example I often use is the Corona pandemic. And I found from a German Katastrophenschutz Institute an analysis from 2012 where they had a scenario for a Corona pandemic, and I was wondering, and they played out the scenario really nice. So got many of the details right, and I was wondering why were we so unprepared. And then I looked at the probability here at the front page, and it said it may materialize in 100 to 500 years, and then it's obviously no politician, but also no CEO or CFO will grant money for that, or and that's my way to saying, how can we tackle that head on? How can we communicate risks properly so that we really can start mitigating them and getting budget for that?
So let me complement with another example that comes to my mind. There was the Fukushima crisis, and there was 2011. And we helped a lot of our clients in short-term and mid-term risk mitigation. Because there was kind of the same thing that we had in the lockdown. So there were kind of situation rooms, war rooms, control towers were set up. Everyone was discussing what can we do. And then we clearly kind of codified all of this knowledge. And then we had the lockdown. And I looked into the old documents, and it felt like, 80% of that is still exactly the same. Why is it that we are not prepared now? Maybe not to the extent, right? But we should be prepared to cover whatever, let's say 80% of the disruption, right? And that was not the case. It was kind of everyone was called on cold feet, and then kind of everyone struggled, and everyone said, we need to do something. So there is, I feel that there is a little bit of a short memory of companies. So there is a disruption. We do something. We see that it's strategically important to prepare. We implement something, and then after a couple of years, we see that it costs money, and we did not have a disruption, so we can go back to normal. Now, how do we communicate? Not in the case of a disruption, because then it's easy, right? Everyone in the board will understand that, holy shit, my production is at risk, so I need to do something. But how do we communicate 2 years later that it's still important? And this is something where I feel people in supply chain or procurement that are kind of responsible for this risk management are still more on the nerdy side. So they love their the numbers. They love their KPIs, super detailed. And that is where we need to kind of lift up. We need to kind of find a story. We need to find a narrative, which is, by the way, also what we described in the book that we wrote, Source to Sold. The narrative is super, super important. An example of narrative might be that we look into what is the EBITDA at risk, because boards talk about EBITDA, they talk about revenue, they talk about customers, right? So we might want to kind of understand what is here, what is at risk. We might also use something that you described today, which I found super interesting, that we say that, hey, we have a supplier, and that supplier might have a very small part. What is the multiple? So if that supplier goes bankrupt and we don't have an alternative, and that is something like €5, and then a final product of whatever €500 or €5,000 is at risk. So the risk multiplier is like 100 or 1,000. That is something that we need to communicate. And very important, if you think about the typical top-down communication, you have your story ready, but then you also have it backed up by numbers. So because
in case they ask.
Exactly. The board will clearly ask questions. So we need to be prepared. But first of all, we need to be very clear in our first story. hey, do you understand what is at risk? We have this margin at risk, and we need to do these 5 things to mitigate.
I learned it the hard way. I remember that remembered me of a story where I came into the board room with the Monte Carlo simulation and explained, the risk factors at play and why we need to do something about it. And as you would have predicted, most likely it never resonated with them.
And after 5 minutes, you saw them taking out their phones and checking emails.
Yeah. In general, the narrative you're talking about is quite important. The revenue at risk, and that's out of curiosity. What are the limitations in regards to the pushbacks you have received? Have you received them? Because I remember once that the pushback was, it's still based on assumptions. Yeah, you have done the calculations, you linked it to revenue or EBITDA, and that's good. But the probabilities are still based on assumptions. Is there something you know what to counter to that, or is it something we have to live with?
So that's exactly what happens, and this is where we need to be prepared, right? Because the first question is the assumption right? So fully agree. Then questioning that, hey, is it really this revenue or is it way smaller? And if it's way smaller, we don't really need to care about it. What helps is to kind of refer to past incidents. Yeah. And luckily or not luckily, in the last 5 years, we had a lot of incidents. And then we can do the numbers, right? We can do the calculation. Then kind of a bit more in the details, C-suite people will ask that, hey, but we have inventory, right? So why don't we cover with inventory? Right? Then we also need to be prepared and say it and come up with, hey, yes, inventory covers for a certain amount of time, a couple of days or weeks, but at some point in time, it's over. And the risk here, again, that's very interesting, and a lot of people don't understand. You can then say, hey, we fly in stuff. Yes, if you fly in stuff, not only it's more expensive, but we are getting used to it. So to build up stock to switch back to ocean freight is then super hard. So we need to be able to explain why is that the revenue is at risk. And then it always helps to then kind of bring in the customer. Because if the customer does not receive our products, we might risk the lifetime value of a customer. And that is what normally triggers a very good discussion. If you start to talk about lost sales, no company measures lost sales, even though it's a super important KPI. But if you talk about losing customers, or you bring even a customer into the discussion, and the customer says that, hey, we need to have that stuff, and otherwise we will look for an alternative supplier. That is super, super powerful.
And I totally echo the lost sales argument, because we had the discussions as well. And if I remember correctly, there was one part where I say, where we were dragged into a discussion, and it was about, maybe Starbucks will not sell 2 coffees the next day when they closed, or McDonald's will not sell 2 meals the next day to the same person. But if it's a Lexus car brand, people will wait a month, a week, and you do not want necessarily go into that discussion probably, because it's a lost cause more or less when people and the board is not buying.
I agree, and that triggers something where you also need to clearly prepare for the situation, right? If you are, and that's what I always tell my students, if you are Apple, then non-availability means that the queues in front of the stores get longer, right? So scarcity means that you create a higher demand. But now the question is, at some point in time, you want to fulfill this demand. If scarcity is now something that is in the system itself, then there is a risk that you still have, after month and month and month, you have unfulfilled demand, and that's not good, right? So also here, the story is clearly different, right? Or if you would buy a Ferrari, then you might be okay to wait, right? Or you kind of just charge twice as much. But for most of the products, the lost sale, the lost revenue, the lost margin is a real issue.
Does it have to do with how much a product is seen or perceived as a commodity, more or less? Reputation, I guess, is a big factor, like you mentioned Apple, and people are wanting to have an Apple iPhone or I don't know, a certain cloth brand or whatever it is. That for sure has to do with it.
Yes. So if the more commodity, the more you are, it's easy to replace you as a supplier. So the more commodity, the more availability is key. Every non-availability means that your customer buys somewhere else because they probably already have the second source in place, right? And that is very important to understand. So if we have a disruption in our supply chain and our availability goes down from 99% to 90%, typical supply chain nerdy talk, right? So that means that, hey, these 9% that translates into lost sales, right? Very often half of it is then lost sale. Yeah. And that is a big number.
So let's assume we have ensured our seat on the table, on the almost infamous table. How do we not lose it? What do we need constantly to keep in mind to stay at the table, to add value as risk and resilience managers to business discussions?
So the board is interested in progress. So if you are at the table and you report back, right, because there's something going wrong and you have to report back, then you're out of the room whenever things get better. If you then start to kind of add value, you show that, hey, with our risk and resilience approach, we can further increase availability. We can further kind of make customers happy. And then you start to talk about the new stuff that you use for that. AI might be able to help to detect disruptions and to prioritize disruptions. And also kind of using the time to educate the board, right? So to kind of step by step do that. That is something where you're invited again, right? If you go back into a reporting role, then if things stabilize, you're out, right? So you need to define your role, right? And your role should be, so to say, to push the company forward and to be, so to say, the guardian of your business value. If you can fulfill that, then you will stay in.
Maybe as always, if you add value to conversations, right? If you support decision making or help taking tough decisions or breaking them down, you will be a guest who is invited again. It came to mind at your previous statement where I had this discussion about how to communicate risk and the narrative, how important the narrative is. Just need to get it out of my system and mention it here briefly. I had once this very funny situation in a family-owned company which was very, very old already, and I needed to communicate a message here in regards to risk, and I just said at the end jokingly, like, this company is already around for several hundred years. Should it stop tomorrow and on your watch, so to speak, jokingly? But that helps making people accountable at the end, that they have an important role, and that ignoring risk at the end, it doesn't go away. It's like you may not pay the cost for it immediately, but at a certain point it will kick you in the...
Exactly, and this is also something that is important. You need to kind of clearly extract the signals from the noise, right? And if you wait too long and you see the signals and your gut feeling tells you that something is cooking, something is going wrong, but I don't react because I'm not so sure, right? That's not good, right? A lot of my clients that are kind of data heavy but insight poor, and with this they are just too late to the game, right? So I can only encourage everyone to kind of pay attention to the early signals and be prepared.
Do you have a secret sauce how to separate noise from signal? Is there something you can tell from your vast experience?
It's very interesting that when you talk to the supply chain planners, to the procurement people, or to risk people, their experience is often very, very good, right? So they kind of feel something cooking.
They have this gut feeling.
Exactly. And this gut feeling is super, super important. So whenever the gut feeling says that, hey, there's something going on, you should immediately react and analyze it, right? And now, as I understand, you guys are now kind of putting some AI, Gen AI, whatsoever funky algorithms to do this in a more systematic way. So this is kind of really kind of to use the experience of the planner to cut through the noise is super, super important, right?
You need to bring the close as possible to the so-called front line, to the front base where operations is done, because they know their systems. They know when something is off, and we usually, as risk or resilience manager, we can systematize it. We can put formulas around it and all the stuff. But the people who are doing this on a daily basis have, as you said, like this gut feeling, this intuition, and it's worth following them.
In addition, what guys like you can bring them is to kind of beef them up with further insights. So they might have a good gut feeling in their current situation. It might be a good gut feeling for their current suppliers, but they might not have a good gut feeling for a tier 4 supplier, right? And to bring this to their attention and say, hey, look, there is something, watch it. That I think is super helpful. To combine, let's say, I would say data intelligence insights with experience and with gut feeling.
Yeah, what I used to do back then is that I often try to extract the fragility of the system from the guys working with the system, because that's really, they know where they usually look away, like hope or cross the fingers and hope that nothing will happen. And this is, I always say, this is what separates fragility from risk, basically. This is a so-called Sollbruchstelle, so something which will break whatever kind of volatility or stress is put onto it. And this is what we want to find, and then we add the information and make ideally make signals out of it, and they say, look, okay, here is a highly fragile part of my supply chain or of my operations, and suddenly I get an alert for a strike or whatever it is, and then they can make sense out of it and react much faster. So that's...
No, I agree. And that is what, so ideally companies should every now and then, every month, every quarter or so, do a little bit of a supply chain stress test, right? Where they were kind of, you just claim that, hey, demand went up by 50%. Till what level can we follow? Where does it break? And how much do we need to do to kind of fulfill that? Demand goes down by 50%. There's also a break point, right? Where we cannot kind of go down, right? The supply chain does not deliver. Where's the break point? So that is something that we clearly need to understand to be able to define the mitigation levers.
I found that many people working in supply chain have this understanding intuitively. When I talk to other peers in risk management, not involved in supply chain, it's quite far away from them. So that's very close to what I have observed. I just look at one slide you presented today where you were talking about the standard, the advanced, and the resilient future, and you touched already on stress testing. And that stuff. We also touched on EBITDA at risk and revenue at risk. The resilient future is what we have left, what we're looking at. What's your blueprint for that?
So we need to a couple of things. We need to make sure that we have I would say a risk mindset or an awareness that everyone is alerted that, hey, something can go wrong, and I always need to check. Very, very important. We talked about communication. We need to kind of have the right story. And not only, we talked a lot about C-level communication, but it's also that we need to communicate with our colleagues from marketing and sales, and from engineering and from finance. And we need to be able to talk to kind of the leaders, the management level, but then also going even down to the shop floor, right? Because also here, it's very important that we have this risk mindset, right? So that is something that is super important. To mitigate, we clearly need to have also creative solutions. So here, I always call it, we need to have curiosity in the organization. We need to be kind of eager to explore new stuff. And that might be new technologies. There might be new suppliers. That might be just a different way to design a product, and with this make it much more resilient. And with this, then hopefully we then get to this, what we discussed earlier, to the guardian of the business value. And with this, our role in supply chain risk should not be defined by a cost function, but it should be really defined by enabling successful delivery of products to our customers. So it's kind of the enabler for growth.
Curiosity, understanding the business obviously helps a lot. So be close to where the fun happens. In your experience, how much are supply chain resilience guys, or in general risk and resilience experts, involved in resilience by design? I read this interesting study about the first semiconductor shortage after COVID, where the OEMs performed quite differently. So we had the German ones who ran out quite quickly of stock in that regards, because they were more just in time. We had a Japanese OEM which had some safety stock out of learnings and could sell for quite a bit longer their cars. And then we had Tesla who just recoded their software to use other chips. And I think that's where we should get at a certain point, that we are quite flexible in adjusting that. How much are we involved in that?
And it's interesting. So kind of the low mature supply chains, they would solve the challenge by pressuring the supplier and trying to find a second source. The next one, so the Japanese, would then be able to collaborate much, or not be able. They did already collaborate with their suppliers, so they were kind of much closer connected. And with this, they had completely different levers to pull, right? And the best, like Tesla, did change the design of the products, and that is quite interesting. That is, I would say, showing nicely the different levers set, right? So you kind of from a short-term control tower to a mid-term resilience measures to kind of long-term, we design our product to be resilient and we are agile to change it. So every company clearly needs to get to this design resiliency. It's not easy. Also, what we discussed earlier, that big companies tend to forget everything after 6 months. So to have that ingrained, so to say, in the DNA, right? So that is what I talked about, this risk mindset. So kind of if I design something in my engineering and R&D department, it needs to be designed in a way that I know that, hey, if something happens, I can also change the design, right? So I'm not only fixed on this one. And then it goes to the production, to the sourcing, to everyone, and sales as well. Sales might then be able to sell a little bit of a different option, right? So they don't need to stick to something that is not available. Maybe we can kind of just upgrade and change our price, and the customer is super happy. Yeah. And so it is an end-to-end topic, and everyone needs to work on this to make sure that we are resilient.
In your presentation today, in your keynote, you also mentioned or touched on skills and capability. We need to teach. We need to ensure that we communicate properly. We discussed that, but the teaching factor is how do you do that in a corporate setting? Is there some best practices? Do you do a lot of lessons learned, or how do you approach that?
Colleagues of McKinsey many years ago looked into why do transformations fail or not. And they came up with many good ideas. And one model I found super interesting, and that relates to the question on teaching. They called it the influence model. And the idea is that someone would change their behavior. So if you want to implement something new, right? Like, so this risk mindset is something new. And I would only change my behavior to be more risk aware if 4 things happen. So one is that my role models, they already implemented the new idea, the new process, the new approach. And a role model does not necessarily need to be the boss. It can also be just a colleague around the corner or someone else. Then we need to be convinced that the new way of working, right? So not just kind of hammering down the suppliers, but working together with them in a collaborative way is the right thing. So that is something I'm convinced. Someone told me the story that, and I believe that. Second one. The third one is I have the right capabilities in place. So there is a new way to approach our risk and resilience process, and I know what to do. Right? I can use the software. I know whom to call. Right? So that is super important that this is in place. By the way, a lot of the planning systems implementation failed because this was not done. Right? So people were just not trained. And then you see kind of super advanced systems. No one uses it, and everyone is working in Excel. And the fourth one is just formal processes need to be in place to reinforce, right? And that is something where, depending on the assessment, what is missing, this is where you then focus on in your capability building, right? So you do not necessarily do kind of a capability building all over the place, but talking to people, you kind of relatively quick feel what is missing, and then you start to coach or to teach them.
Yeah. And this ideally leads to success here. From my part, I'm coming to the end already. I just want to make sure I still quote your final slide from the presentation, and it was from Ayrton Senna, the Formula One driver, and he stated, "You cannot overtake 15 cars when it's sunny weather, but you can when it's raining." Why is this so important for supply chain and risk and resilience management?
I found this super interesting because it basically says that if there is a crisis, then doing better will put you clearly ahead of competition. So we had clients where they increased their market share by 1, 2, 3% because in the crisis they did better. With this, they had availability, others had not, and then they outcompeted the others. And to go back for the others, then to catch up is super, super hard. So that means that if everything is fine, everything works super, then it's super hard to compete. If
there's an inertia, they do not change.
Exactly. But if things are anyhow disrupted and if there's problems and everything, make sure that you are ahead of the curve. Do everything to be prepared. Have everything in place to be more resilient. This resilience will pay back in form of increased market share, higher revenue, and
happier
so on.
Customers and
exactly.
better reputation.
Exactly. That's why I like this quote a lot.
Awesome. I will use it now as well in my presentations.
That's good.
That's
okay
good. For you.
That's perfectly fine. That's great.
It really resonated with me. Knut, thanks a lot. Is there anything else we haven't touched now you want to discuss or bring up?
I can do a bit of a kind of a marketing pitch so we did write a book, Source to Sold, 3 years ago with Radu Palamario. And that is about leadership stories in supply chain, where we also kind of touch upon the importance of narrative, right? So the importance of storytelling, and then clearly in terms of podcasts, there's a podcast where I'm part of the Friends. It's called Felgendreher and Friends, and I'm part of the Friends, and that is always interesting. New topics, current topics. We also discussed risk and resilience a lot. So if anyone is interested, just listen in. Otherwise, then I have to thank you. It was a good discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. And let's make sure that we keep telling the risk and resilience story and convince people.
Very much so. Thanks a lot. It was my pleasure. It was great having you on the show.